Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Monday morning. We're kicking off the week and I'm joined by Lindsay Granger. Nice to see you, Lindsay.
I'm so happy to be back, but we got to start with what we always start with. What is on your radar?
Yes, big news to get to. Obviously, there is breaking news, in fact, to cover. President Joe Biden has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer. This news is, of course, gutting and everyone should wish Biden a full recovery. Our thoughts are with him and his family at this time. Now, we will discuss the diagnosis, the world's reaction, and what it means in our next segment. But for right now, I actually want to focus on a different, but possibly quite related news development over the weekend, which was the release of the Robert Hur tapes. Again, this is related. Now, while it is vital to wish President Biden the best, his latest health issue cannot distract us from continuing to scrutinize how his inner circle covered up his cognitive decline, his health problems in the last 2 years of his presidency, or longer. Indeed, this cover-up of former President Biden's cognitive decline has finally been exposed for all the world to see, or rather, to hear. The full 5-hour audio recording of Biden's interview with special counsel Robert Hur was released and obtained by Axios over the weekend. It makes abundantly clear that any elected Democratic official, mainstream media mouthpiece, or Biden administration campaign surrogate who blithely asserted that 2024 Biden was the top of his game, sharp as ever, ready to rumble, whatever, well, they were lying to you. Excerpts from the tapes leave no room for doubt that Biden was incapable of serving another term in office. In fact, it's astonishing that he was not forced to resign the presidency during his final 2 years. Moreover, the Democratic Party deserves the profound mistrust of the American people. What they tried to keep from you, from us, it's shocking. No one, even tangentially associated with the Biden administration, should ever hold office again or work on campaigns again. Every Democratic senator, representative, and talking head who said, "Trust me, Biden's fine, I know," well, last year, they should face a reckoning. If you think I'm being dramatic, just wait until you hear these tapes for yourself. Now, for context, in case anyone's forgotten, special counsel Robert Hur interviewed Biden as part of an investigation into classified documents being wrongly stored in boxes at his home. Biden willingly agreed to answer questions about why he had held on to those documents. The improper storage of classified documents is a criminal matter, though not a unique or a serious one, given that political figures do routinely find themselves keeping these boxes, often by mistake. This was an issue for Donald Trump and Mike Pence as well. Now, the problem is not that Biden kept the documents, it's that he had trouble recalling basic facts and dates during this interview. That was Hur's characterization of their conversation. Hur released a report declining to prosecute Biden because, quote, a jury would likely find Biden to be an elderly man with a poor memory. Remember that? While this description actually acquitted Biden of any crime, the White House was furious about it at the time because it contradicted their narrative that Biden was sharp as a tack and fully capable of running for re-election. Hur's report pointed out that Biden had struggled to recall the exact date of the death of his son, Beau Biden. President Biden rejected that after the report came out. He raged at Hur, saying, "How in the hell dare he raise that?" Hur was attacked by Biden, by Democrats, by many, not all, but some, in the media. Chuck Schumer said Hur was totally wrong. Quote, I talk to President Biden regularly, usually several times in a week. His mental acuity is great, it's fine, it's as good as it's been over the years. Then there was The Atlantic, the magazine. The Atlantic published an article by writer Adam Serwer titled, How Hur Misled the Country on Biden's Memory. Well, someone misled the country. It wasn't Robert Hur. Here's an excerpt from the tapes.
And what's happened in the meantime is that Trump gets elected in November of 2017? 2016. All right. So, why do I have 2017 here?
That's when you left office, January of 2017.
Okay.
Here's a bit more of that.
But that's when Trump gets sworn in.
Right.
January.
Right. Correct.
Okay. Yeah. And in 2017, Beau had passed, and this is personal.
To be clear, that was Biden attempting to answer a question about why he had kept certain documents. It's difficult to provide an overview of this answer which was rambling and went on for 5 minutes, but Biden is inarguably confused about the year that Beau died. Not just the month of the date, whether it coincided with his initial run for president, his decision not to challenge Hillary Clinton for the nomination, or his choice to eventually run against Trump. Now, more worryingly, he has trouble staying focused entirely. His answers are incoherent. At other points in the conversation, he goes on long tangents that have nothing to do with the matter at hand. Robert Hur patiently, gently tries to steer him back to what matters, classified documents. At various moments, Biden seems to think he's being interviewed by a biographer. He tells stories the way very old people do. One anecdote leads into another, and he gets lost in his train of thought. At this point, even the mainstream media knows that Hur is totally acquitted, and everyone who defended Biden is sunk. Quote, "For his part, Mr. Hur is generous and professional, hardly the political villain that the White House made him out to be after his report was released." That is according to the New York Times. Quote, "He gently and repeatedly tries to refocus the president on the storage of classified documents. At times he sounds almost like a grandson trying to get accurate information from an elderly relative, trying to prompt his memory with photos and reminders of the timeline. Even so, there is so much that Mr. Biden can no longer recall." And Lindsay, I don't want to beat up on Joe Biden. I want to treat him with dignity, and obviously he's going through something very difficult right now, him and his family, and we will discuss that more in our next segment. But the fact is that he ran for re-election. If the Democrats had their way, he would be the president now for another 3 years, 4 years, and that matters. We need to discuss and continue to evaluate how the decision was made that he should run for re-election, the awareness that people around him had about his declining mental, physical, health-related capacities, and why the media wasn't able to get hold of that story. These tapes shocked me. And remember how they treated this man, Robert Hur. He was attacked. He was accused of election interference by Democrats because of the way he characterized this conversation. The way he characterized this conversation, now that I've heard it, was gentle, in my view.
I mean, this is definitely a major bombshell within the Democratic Party. Hindsight is 20/20, but so is foresight. I disagree with you vehemently when we talked about this, that all Democrats knew. I do understand now, since the last week since I've seen you, that multiple stories have come out showing that more people maybe knew than I assumed. I also understand that there was a rigorous intent to protect him by even people that weren't top Democrats. So maybe some of these people who actually said they didn't have the foresight to see this coming were part of that, the people in the party that were blocked from getting real access to Biden when he was in moments like this, which we know was a 5-hour conversation. So the first hour he may be a little solid. He was making jokes, talking about Jill Biden and having a little fun. And then you saw as he got into it, he started to lose his memory on key things about family and life. I do think that the cost that they underestimated as a Democratic Party was the empathy that the American public would have had if Biden, who went in not as the strongest orator, he went in as the safe option, as the establishment candidate that everyone knew, would have decidedly been a one-term president. If he would have passed that baton intentionally, he would have been looked at as a hero right now. And so I think it was a major miscalculation from the party, and this should be a real reckoning moment for those who did know, to really come to terms with what it looks like to protect the establishment versus answer real questions that the American public had. Because I do think that there were real questions. And honestly, we would be in a health crisis right now if our current president was battling cancer with this unfortunate announcement. And so that adds on top of the fact that he would have been 82 years old. There's a conversation about age and ability. And these are real conversations because separate from politics, we all understand empathy. We all have a grandparent that maybe reminded us of in that conversation. But the difference is, this is leading the country. This is someone who makes the major decisions for every potential war we might get in, every dollar that we save or spend. And I think that that is something that everyone has to come to terms with about how this is
like an emeritus board seat or something. This is a very important job, running the most important country in a pivotal time in our national security, as important diplomatic ventures have to be engaged with respect to China, the Middle East, Russia, and to have this be the state of the president and then have still expected that it could go on for another 4 years. I think the Democrats, it would behoove them to look for leadership in their party outside the Biden administration, given how bad this was. It's just, I think it strains credulity that more cabinet officials, Kamala Harris, such people didn't know. I would be looking to people like Dean Phillips, who actually stood up and said, I love Joe Biden, I agree with Joe Biden's policies, but I don't think he can be president again. And he was mocked, laughed at, he was spat upon, metaphorically.
Yeah.
But he got it, and a lot of people didn't. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We are up bright and early to deliver you another terrific show. I'm joined by Lindsay Granger. Hello,
Thanks for having
Lindsay.
me, Robby. How are you doing today?
Just fine. It's, what's today, Tuesday?
Time for some coffee, and then we'll get into it.
Time for some coffee. Although we have a new coffee machine in the
We're not going to talk about it.
studio that I'm not thrilled with yet.
He hates the coffee. But that's not what's on your radar today. So
No.
tell everybody what else is on your radar.
I could deliver a monologue on that, but instead, we'll talk about this. Former advisor to Barack Obama and CNN pundit David Axelrod is trying to use Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis as an excuse to urge the media to stop covering the cognitive decline cover-up. In other words, he's trying to cover up the cover-up. It's cynical and it's wrong. Watch this.
Silences or delays a lot of conversations about his, last year and a half of his presidency for now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think those conversations are going to happen, but they should be more muted and set aside for now as he's struggling.
President Biden's cancer diagnosis, which we reported on yesterday, has prompted entirely appropriate expressions of sympathy from notable Republicans, Democrats, world leaders, and the public at large. Extending well wishes, thoughts, and prayers to political opponents is, in my view, a humane and civilizing instinct that might, in some small way, improve the U.S.'s fraught political climate. And regardless, it's just the right thing to do. But the former president's prognosis must not bring a premature end to the conversation about whether Biden was cognitively fit for office in 2024. On the contrary, the public should demand answers and accountability on this topic with renewed vigor, precisely because of the well-founded mistrust engendered by Biden's family members and his inner circle, Democratic elites, and to some extent the mainstream media. The reason we cannot necessarily accept at face value that Biden himself just learned about his diagnosis last week is due to Biden's own actions and the actions of his senior advisors, campaign staff, and party leaders. Now, it might very well be the case that Biden only recently became aware of this very serious health problem. But the timing is suspicious, seeing as this news came on the heels of the release of special counsel Robert Hur's taped interview with Biden, in which the lie that Hur had mischaracterized Biden as an, quote, elderly man with a poor memory was definitively exposed as such. The Biden White House had attempted to discredit Hur. Biden himself raged at a press conference, blaming Hur for bringing up Beau Biden's death. But those tapes, obtained and released by Axios, explicitly contradict Biden's version of events. It was the president who first referenced the death of his son, evincing confusion over the exact date. If anything, Hur was too gentle with Biden. He patiently listened to the president's rambling, incoherent anecdotes and attempted to steer him back to the topic at hand, alleged improper storage of classified documents. Now, Biden's behavior during the 5-hour interview raises serious questions about his fitness for office at that time, let alone whether he remains sharp enough to perform the most demanding job in the world for a subsequent 4 years. Top Democrats at the time, however, they echoed Biden talking points that behind closed doors the president was at the top of his game. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Biden's mental acuity was as good as it's been over the years and that the pair would talk several times a week. The message from virtually every Democratic leader who interacted with Biden was the same. Hur is a partisan actor, shouldn't be trusted. Biden's absolutely fine. Everyone knows now that that is false. It's not just the Hur tapes. Original Sin, the new book by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, slated for release later this week, might actually be today. Excerpts from the book have already publicized the elaborate steps taken by Biden campaign staff to shield him from press scrutiny. The inescapable conclusion is that party leaders were well aware of Biden's diminished capacity and were more than willing to mislead the voters, their own voters, about that fact. Now, it would be very convenient for Democratic leadership if the media and the public simply moved on from the Biden cover-up. Unsurprisingly, one Democratic pundit is advising precisely this course of action. As I mentioned earlier, that pundit is Axelrod, who said on Sunday that conversations about Biden's cognitive decline, quote, should be more muted and set aside for now as he's struggling through this. That's a preposterous suggestion made in service of an obvious partisan cause. Biden and his handlers steadfastly maintained he was fit for office and should seek a second term, even amidst mounting, well-founded concerns about his health. They attempted to pull a fast one on the American people, and they were caught. Now, it is perfectly possible to remain respectful, magnanimous, and well-meaning toward Biden in terms of his battle with cancer, while continuing to seek answers to questions about who knew what and when. And we're not going to stop pursuing those answers, even though we are saddened by the Biden diagnosis and wish him well, of course. I wish him a recovery. It's a terrible thing to go through cancer. Almost everyone in the country probably knows someone who's had cancer or who has died of cancer. It's not about that. I hope his health improves dramatically. But I was just waiting for some Democrat to say, oh, because of the diagnosis, we should really stop investigating who tried to, accommodate him and who tried to conceal that he wasn't doing too well. Let's just not ask questions about that. No, we're not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
The way that you're saying it is like it's 2 weeks of Democrats saying this. They said it the day that we found out he had cancer. The public did. They said it the day after. And I think, yes, there's going to be intense scrutiny. Yes, we should talk about the 2024 election and Biden's term. But I think we should also take a minute as humans to look at the life of somebody who really spent time and time again beating the odds and turmoil, specifically when it comes down to family members passing away or hard experiences. And that's what he's saying is just take a breath. It's okay for us to not constantly be in the form of attack. I mean, we've been hashing through how cognitive Biden was since the day that he showed up on that debate stage last June. I mean, we got it. The media maybe didn't do as good of a job as you think before that. But from June to now, we've been covering Biden's health. And it's like, take a minute to just respect the person. Now, I also think that obviously the American public is confused and wants some answers. So PSA tests for most presidents, which would detect prostate cancer, happens often. And so we need to understand why, if the levels were rising in any way, that wasn't flagged as something they were looking out to. But I also have another question about, the way that we protect HIPAA laws as regular people and constituents is totally different for presidents. So we want to know how much Trump weighs. We want to know how Biden's doing with everything. And I don't think that it's unfair of a question to ask, especially if you're throwing your name back in the hat for another presidency. But I do think that you're allowed to say something like a cancer diagnosis when you're prepared and ready to do so. And perhaps that just wasn't the case when he was actually running, and it's something that he maybe found out in the last 5 months. That could be very viable. Now, I think we can do this and look at a lot of what happened to Biden without ageism, without cruelty, but with honesty. So like I said, on both sides of the aisle, people want some answers. But David Axelrod has a point. Maybe yesterday wasn't the exact time to do it, right after we discussed the fact that he was diagnosed with cancer. You can give it a little bit of breath. It's okay for journalists to give things some breath. And, like you said about this book coming out, from Axios, Alex Thompson.
Yeah, the original sin book.
He's been looking at this. He's been looking at this for a long time. It's not like, it's like one and done. He's been looking at this deeply, Biden's cognitive decline, and so have many people. And so it's one thing to blame the media, but it's another thing to say that you're going to get upset that somebody's having empathy in these times, because these moments that bring the country together, as you've seen.
Empathy is very important. It's just, I guess I don't, because I now know a lot about the efforts Democrats went to cover up his declining health. I don't trust, the Biden team doesn't have trust and credibility with me. So when they release this announcement the same weekend that the Hur tapes come out and 48 hours before the original Sin book is supposed to come out, and they say, oh yeah, we just found out about this on Friday. Can you, pity me, do the empathy thing? I think it's very suspect timing. Now, you could say that's, no, they didn't try to hide that from you, Robby, but how would you know if they didn't try to hide? They did try to hide something from you. So that's when you mislead people once, you break faith with people. So were saying, how could he not know, previously that he had a cancer diagnosis? Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. Maybe they just missed it. I was listening to Zeke Emanuel. I think it was Zeke Emanuel. It's Rahm Emanuel's brother, who's a doctor. He was on CNN or ABC or somebody yesterday or the day before saying that, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It is certain he had it already. Maybe they didn't, the cancer at this stage.
Right, you see levels jump, and that's an indicator.
It's possible they didn't catch it, but again, for how checked the president is, and I would say the same thing about Trump. Trump's health is scrutinized by the media to a large degree. They are always asking questions about them. I remember conversations about whether the amendment to make you not the president anymore, which was the 28th, 27th, I can't remember.
We're going to be talking
should be
about
invoked
this.
on him, and to not ever bring that in the context of Biden is just pretty crazy to me. But
There's lots more to discuss. We're going to keep talking about this and stay on top of everyone.
Definitely have not heard the last word from me on this. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. An exciting one with lots of interesting topics to discuss. We'll be joined actually in studio. A special guest, Representative Richie Torres, is stopping by to talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill today, this week. And so we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, but first we got to start with what's on your radar. I think I might know, but tell us what's on your radar.
You're sensing a theme here. Yes, indeed. CNN's Jake Tapper is making the media rounds, promoting his new book, Original Sin, his book with Alex Thompson, which explains how President Joe Biden's handlers, advisors, and campaign staff, as well as Democratic Party leads and portions of the media, shielded Biden from scrutiny during his presidency. Now, his obvious, appalling cognitive decline was hidden from the press by Chuck Schumer and by Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and Karine Jean-Pierre and Jen Psaki and his cabinet and Kamala Harris and many, many other people. And now the media is admitting it, finally. But frankly, it's not good enough. Let me be clear. I am glad that some media figures are admitting that they were misled by Biden and that they should have pressed him and his team more aggressively for answers about his diminished cognitive state. Admitting wrongdoing is better than not admitting wrongdoing. But the issue is that Biden's health-related collapse was not missed by everyone in the media. It was just missed by the mainstream media. Conservative and independent media, they noticed it and they spoke up about it. And we didn't have nearly the same access to the White House, to Biden, that Jake Tapper did. Here was Megyn Kelly pressing Tapper on this point on her show yesterday. Let's watch.
He promised you that he would be transparent about his health records, and then he wasn't. And when you sat with him again,
at all.
including 1 month after the Jackie Walorski thing, you didn't ask him about it. You didn't follow up on the fact that he was falling up the stairs, that he was losing his train of thought regularly, that he was slurring, that he was incomprehensible, that he was getting lost on the White House lawn. You sat right across from him and you asked none of that, notwithstanding the fact that he had promised you he would be fully transparent about his health issues.
Tapper did say that he called Lara Trump to apologize to her for that infamous interview in which he criticized her for noticing Biden's cognitive decline. Remember that? Let's take a stroll down memory lane.
Is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable.
You have
to
no.
watch somebody on stage search for
That's so amazing.
questions
It's so amazing to me
and
that
try and figure out an answer.
a cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were mocking his stutter. Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline. I would think that somebody in the Trump family would be more sensitive to people who do not have medical licenses.
Ooh, that interview has not aged well. Tapper was right to apologize for it. He's also right to acknowledge that he's embarrassed that he did not pursue the story more aggressively. But look, this story is not over. Biden just announced that he has cancer. And if you believe what he's saying, that he didn't know until last Friday. This assertion strains credulity for a number of reasons. Look, it's inconceivable to me that the President of the United States, having access to better health care than just about anyone else in the country, would not have had the kind of testing that would have revealed such a condition. And if there was some suspicion of illness that was not followed up upon because it would be inconvenient to the campaign, well, that's a story too. Let's have some mainstream journalists get after it. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party is trying desperately to pivot to any other topic. Republicans are coming to take away your health benefits, shouts Hakeem Jeffries. So says he. Honestly, do you believe him? Does anyone? The entire leadership of the party should resign in disgrace. They're complicit in this cover-up, and they are not trustworthy, which is what we are continuing to discuss here today. The Megyn Kelly interview with Jake Tapper was, I think, very interesting. And, I want to be careful here in my criticism because I'm glad Tapper wrote this book with Alex Thompson. I'm glad they're doing these media appearances. Thompson was there as well on the Megyn Kelly show, and they stood up to the heat, as it were, and they admitted some wrongdoing in terms of how they handled this story. So that's all good. It's better for people to admit when they got it wrong than to steadfastly maintain they did nothing wrong. So I appreciate that. What did you make of the interview?
Alex Thompson, I'll give him a pass because he's been covering Biden's health throughout the presidency and the re-election announcement. Now, Jake Tapper. So Naomi Biden, which is Joe Biden's granddaughter, she said something that I thought was really profound yesterday. She said, the ones who rarely enter the arena but profit from the spectacle of those that do. And that's what she was referring to Jake Tapper. And so I'm going to bear with me for a second, but if you guys know, Brene Brown has a TED Talk about basically entering the arena and the people that are spectators that always have all the criticisms. Biden gave 50 years of his life to entering the political arena and trying to make change. Jake Tapper is a journalist that was covering Biden, and he now is using a very opportunistic route, which has minimal, damage for him. It's making it low risk, high reward move for him to do at this time when Biden's not running to be a part of this type of book. When we just saw some of those interviews where he was also, like everyone else, misled and perhaps intentionally doing it, whatever he wants to say. Both times it was opportunistic. To make Laura Trump an embarrassment on his show was opportunistic, and now to write this book. So to me, I think it's very important that in this capitalist world, we understand what's going on. He's trying to make money, and that's very intentional and obvious, but I don't know that it's appropriate to do it on the back of Joe Biden. Like, was Joe Biden actually having this grand scheme to try to scam everybody, or was Joe Biden an older man who actually just believed that after 50 years of resilience and overcoming major health and serious life obstacles that he could go again? And I think that that's a question we all have to ask ourselves before we try to make out some big scheme that was planned to try to run the presidency and plan that he was going to pass the torch to Kamala. I don't think all that was there. And I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill. And it's okay to provide space around somebody struggling with a health issue and understand that sometimes when people get older, they may not be acknowledging that change that's so obvious for family and friends and loved ones and staff and colleagues to see.
But don't you think maybe he never came straight out and said it, that I'm going to be a one-term president, but he did stress that he would be a transitional figure to new leadership. I think there was an expectation that he was maybe only going to serve one term. So then it does get a little bit into territory. Well, it was his decision to run again when he shouldn't have. Now, maybe you can put a lot more blame on the people around him, his family members, his senior advisors, giving him bad advice. We're also, some of the reporting in the Tapper book is that he was, reliant on Donlin, this one pollster who was characterizing things in a very rosy way for Biden, even up until the end, where Biden was shocked to hear from other pollsters who represented what most polls showed him starting to be way outside the bounds of even conceivably being able to win re-election, and he was surprised by that because he was using someone who was presenting the numbers to him in the most favorable possible light. That a little bit goes to the accountability. I also I was thinking more and talking yesterday with Amber Duke, who hosts the show often on Fridays, about the timeline of the cancer diagnosis. And the more I think about it, the more I find it really hard to believe that this was not known to Biden and his inner circle months and months ago. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe their line is that was really missed until last week. I find that so. This person, maybe the average citizen can miss something. These things get missed, but this is someone with much better health care than anybody else for good reason. He's an important figure. And I just find it so inconceivable. What I find possible is they maybe had some indication because of his health condition. I mean, that could have been what happened too, that he's experiencing some kind of symptoms where they should have checked to see if it was this, and they decide, no, we don't want to know, because if we know, then we got to tell everybody, and then it'll be a huge campaign issue. And so they allow him to linger in some kind of pain. And at that age, pain or discomfort for these reasons, that can actually drive you. That can propel a mental decline very, very, very much as can be the case. You know, we've all had senior citizen relatives who, you know, enter the hospital for a fall or something.
Right.
And then they turn that corner mentally because of that experience. So with all due respect and wanting him to recover fully, I have a lot more questions about the timing of the cancer diagnosis. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Thursday morning. I'm joined by Lindsay Granger. Nice
Happy to be here. How you doing today?
I like your dress.
Oh, is that a compliment? Oh.
I can give compliments during the cheery opening banter before we really get into the fight.
You're right. So let's stick with the pleasantries for a few seconds and then get to your radar.
Yes.
So what's on your radar?
All right. Well, I know you're sick of hearing about my views on the Joe Biden mental decline cover-up, so let's talk about something else.
Another Joe.
Let the liberal Joe Rogan talent search begin. Why? Because Democrats really, really, really want their own Joe Rogan. They're willing to spend millions to get him, even if doing so kind of defeats the purpose of Joe Rogan. What am I even talking about here? Well, as you're probably aware, we need our own Joe Rogan has rapidly become the most important insight the Democrats took away from the 2024 election. And actually, they're not wrong. Donald Trump's podcast-based media strategy, which culminated in a highly anticipated Rogan interview, clearly did help the GOP make historic gains with young people, particularly young males. Gen Z is embracing Trump, in large part because the alternative media ecosystem, a network of independent podcasters, journalists, entertainers, influencers, and everything in between, is much friendlier to the contrarian contours of modern conservatism than the elite consensus obeyance of modern liberalism. Neither the Joe Rogan Experience nor its peer programs are explicitly political or at all moments geared toward promoting a pro-Trump worldview. They talk about sports, entertainment, culture, working out, humor, dating, video games, whether aliens exist, whether they visited us recently, and all sorts of other topics. But the cumulative effect is a friendliness toward dude topics, political incorrectness, mainstream skepticism that inexorably channels viewers toward the Republican Party. The Democrats are not wrong to want their own version of this, or at least a competitor who can staunch the bleeding in terms of youth enthusiasm for progressive politics. To that end, the New York Times reported this week top Democratic donors, consultants, political operators, former government officials, and activists are working to spend millions of dollars searching for their very own liberal Joe Rogan. At donor retreats and in pitch documents seen by the New York Times, liberal strategists are pushing the party's rich backers to reopen their wallets for a cavalcade of projects to help Democrats, as this cliche now goes, find the next Joe Rogan. That's from the New York Times. The Time continues. The proposals, the scope of which has not been previously reported, are meant to energize glum donors and persuade them that they can compete culturally with President Trump if only they can throw enough money at the problem. Look, these are not theoretical plans. The Times detailed efforts by several well-funded Democratic organizations to recruit talent by raising and spending millions and millions of dollars. An illustrative example is Project Bullhorn, which aims to spend $35 million to supplement the efforts of left-leaning YouTube channels and also to book left-leaning YouTube hosts on bigger and better media platforms. The Times, to its credit, is keenly aware of the overarching problem these efforts will encounter. Quote, the quiet effort amounts to an audacious, skeptics might say desperate, bet that Democrats can buy more cultural relevance online despite the fact that casually right-leaning touchstones like Mr. Rogan's podcast were not built by political donors and did not rise overnight. Indeed, no amount of money can pay for authenticity, and Democratic efforts to coronate a liberal Joe Rogan, no matter the price tag, they allied the unfortunate reality that liberals already had their own Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan. Today, Rogan is a supporter of Trump who pals around with Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson and Kid Rock and other right-wing media figures at UFC fights. But just a few years ago, he had endorsed Bernie Sanders for president and promoted skepticism of corporations from a left-leaning perspective. Now, many in the mainstream media might find this odd. How does one go from endorsing the avatar of democratic socialism in 2020 to endorsing Donald Trump in 2024? But in truth, it's directionally consistent with the paths taken by other leftist alternative media and political figures. Prior to 2020, leftist alternative media was the home for skeptics and contrarians. There was the Young Turks, the Jimmy Dore Show, even Rising, this show, which catered to a much more left-leaning sensibility under the previous hosts, Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty, who departed this program to launch their own channel, Breaking Points, in 2021, before yours truly took over. There was Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Russell Brand. There was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, progressive Democrats who became popular for making frequent appearances on such programs. Now, many of those personalities associated with those programs, they would deny that they've moved to the right or joined the Republican Party, though RFK Jr. and Gabbard obviously have. And you know what? In most cases, they more or less have a point. I agree with them. It's not so much they changed, they didn't change. Rather, their audiences changed. Undeniably, a main motivating factor was COVID-19. As an observer of left media trends, whose own show was growing in popularity at the time, I had a front row seat to the civil war that broke out over the response to the pandemic, which some lefties still view as a mass disabling event. Others viewed as a convenient excuse for tyrannical overreach on the part of the government. This later attitude was also the view of most people on the right, and thus significant segments of the Joe Rogan left found themselves making common cause with MAGA. As a result, the Trump media coalition is for people who distrust elite institutions, legacy journalism, and the expert consensus. Leftists who wanted to remain true to their anti-establishment brand have found the audience is bigger on the right. Meanwhile, the anti-Trump coalition is more or less satisfied, as far as I can tell, with traditional media offerings, print journalism, cable news, etc. Yawn. Therein lies the problem. A new liberal Joe Rogan must rise organically, but such an individual is likely to already exist in the mainstream media or quickly become captured by it, which is a fine career path for that person as far as it goes, but is unlikely to lure undecided or independent voters back to the Democratic folds. Merely throwing money at the problem is a non-starter, since Democratic elites picking the next liberal Rogan creates a kind of paradox. If he's chosen, he ain't Rogan. Moreover, if they did somehow find a popular heterodox podcaster who appealed to young males and possessed the ability to steer them away from Trump, the Democrats would turn on this person the second he called out woke shibboleths or made a serious challenge to the party's establishment. In other words, the very characteristics that make a Rogan are anathema to the modern Democratic Party.
I think Democrats smartly realize that podcasts, 3-hour conversations are much better to humanize people than a 60 minutes interview, as somebody who loves 60 minutes.
Yeah.
But I do understand there's two different audiences, and you have to be aware and cognizant of what happens when you have intentionally created spaces for real conversations. You can't plan everything you say over 3 hours. That's why Joe Rogan is so popular. I also think that Joe Rogan is this autonomous person that is making his own decisions every day, has people on that he likes, and then he'll be critical of them, and he just is allowed to be a free thinker. And so that's not something that a political base can fund. That doesn't come and be built.
Exactly.
So my question is this like a new shiny object for Democrats, or is this a serious plan? And I think that is the real thing that the Democratic Party has to grapple with, because they constantly like the new shiny object. They threw every single new shiny object at the 2024 election and lost. And so I think it's time for a different plan, maybe adjacent to this plan, but I wouldn't say that this should be what we're hearing coming out of those donor retreats is let's find an influencer. Because while I understand how important influencers are in the whole YouTube space and everything online, I do think that it's an entire ecosystem. It's not just one show that's going to make major waves. What Trump did is very intentional. He allegedly or reportedly talked to his son about all the popular podcasts that his son, who is of college age, is interested in and listening to, and intentionally target every single one of those outlets in addition to whatever his team compiled. So this could be In the Weed podcast that a young male is telling him that he's interested in. So Joe Rogan was the obvious choice, but he also did like 50 others. And so I think that's important to remember, that it's not just Joe Rogan. It was an ecosystem echoing some thoughts from Joe Rogan, and that is not something that can be created overnight or with money.
Right. With money, I think, is the key insight, because I agree with the Democrats that it would behoove them, it would benefit them to have a Joe Rogan type figure, or a number of them, who are trying to pull people back, who are not just echoing everything the Democratic Party thinks and says in the kind of finger-wagging way that has so turned off young males, But you can't have the Democratic Party, its elite donors, they can't pay for that. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be ground up. It takes time. There are, I think, people who are basically liberal and basically think Democrats are better than Republicans, but who have criticized Democrats and have some, cross-party credibility. Maybe Jon Stewart, maybe like Bill Burr or something like that. I've seen him on with Bill Maher, and he's clearly more unfriendly to Trump than Bill Maher is, and has kind of been like, well, what are you talking about? But isn't Trump, in a way that seems like you have independent thoughts and you're not just echoing a party? That's what they need. But I don't think, the America's Got Talent, American Idol version of this contest is likely to deliver the goods.
Hopefully we'll hear more reports about what else is coming out of the Democratic Party. This is one start of a good idea, but we need to hear all the rest of them.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today covering all the news here in Washington, and I'm happy to be joined at the desk by my friend Stephen Kent.
Welcome back. Very happy to be here with you.
Good to see you. A lot to get through today.
Well, tell me a little bit about what is in your notes for today.
So it's a pretty somber start today, Stephen, because we are less than 48 hours on from a double killing that shocked this city. The alleged perpetrator has been arrested and charged. 31-year-old Elias Rodriguez of Chicago stands accused of first-degree murder in the deaths of Yaron Leshinsky and Sarah Milgram. Leshinsky, aged 30, and Milgram, 26, were a couple. They were shot dead outside an event held by the American Jewish Committee at the Capitol Jewish Museum on Wednesday night. The charging affidavit asserts that Rodriguez told police at the scene, "I did it for Palestine, I did it for Gaza." It's important for those of us who are sympathetic to the plight of the Palestinians, and I include myself in that, to acknowledge without ambiguity the wrong that was done here. The killing of civilians is wrong. The grief of those who knew and loved Leshinsky and Milgram is impossible for the rest of us to truly imagine, and all we can offer is sympathy and compassion. We've learnt some details of the young couple's life. Yaron was apparently set to propose to Sarah next week, when the two had planned to visit Israel. He had grown up between Israel and Germany, the son of a Jewish father and Christian mother. He, like Sarah, worked for the Israeli embassy here in Washington. Sarah held a BA in environmental studies from the University of Kansas. After graduation, she worked for an organization in Israel that sought to improve dialogue between young Israelis and young Palestinians. Her college roommate told the Associated Press that Sarah was, quote, the ultimate peacemaker in her personal life and her professional life. It's important to know those kinds of details. They allow us to see more quickly the full texture of someone's life and at least begin to grasp the enormity of their loss. It's important to see the full humanity of all victims of conflict and of victims on all sides. And I certainly mean no disrespect to the memory of Yaron or Sarah in saying that that's often not what actually happens. When it comes to coverage of Israel and the Palestinians here in the US, our media reporting and our politicians often suggest some lives matter more than others. To be clear, some reporters here and internationally do the best that they can. Here's a report yesterday from Lindsay Hilsum of Britain's Channel 4 News. It's about the trickle of aid Benjamin Netanyahu's government is finally letting into Gaza after a long blockade.
Children rushed to a place where they'd heard there was hot soup. They scrambled for the scrapings. And most left disappointed and still hungry. If nutritional supplements and food get into Gaza, these children can pull through. But time is running short.
I would like to know, though I'm sure I never will, the name of that little girl in the yellow top and colourful pyjama bottoms screaming in distress, or the baby with the painfully emaciated legs. I'd like to know what their parents, if they're still alive, would say about them or about the trauma of watching a child suffer so badly. I wonder what dreams those parents and children had before the conflict and what dreams they cling to now. I'd like to know more about any of the thousands of Palestinian children killed by Israel over the last 19 months. The Gaza Health Ministry gave a number for the death toll among children this week. Its number is 16,506. It includes 916 infants under the age of 1 and 4,365 children between the ages of 1 and 5. To confront such horror is to be presented with uncomfortable questions. And to be clear, those questions are being asked by some Israelis too. An Israeli opposition leader, Yair Golan, warned just on Monday that his country was on its way to becoming a pariah state. A sane country, Golan said, does not kill babies for a hobby. Now, I've sometimes mentioned here in Rising that I grew up in the north of Ireland at a time when an armed conflict was taking place there. That conflict has many huge differences to what is now going on in Gaza. But I'm often reminded of a phrase we sometimes used back home, a hierarchy of victims. That refers to the unfortunate tendency for media and politicians, and also, if we're honest, all of us, to parcel out our compassion unevenly, to twist our recognition of suffering to fit our preferred political narrative, to suggest that some deaths are more or less deserving of our outrage. Pointing this out is never about downplaying the terrible grief of those who tend to get placed at the apex of that hierarchy of victimhood. But it is to recognise the equally precious humanity of those who get placed below it, so that as we remember the victims of anti-Semitic attacks like Iran and Sarah, we also remember 6-year-old Wadeh al-Fayyoumi, the Palestinian-American boy stabbed to death in a hate crime in suburban Chicago. It's so that when we scrutinise political rhetoric, we hold to account those who target and dehumanize anyone, Jewish or Muslim, Israeli or Palestinian. And so we never forget the people slaughtered by Hamas on October 7th, or the people slaughtered by Israel with the active assistance of the United States government ever since. Is it controversial to say that? Maybe. But it's not, in fact, a false equivalence. It's an act of basic respect.
Well, you put your heart into that. It's hard to get into this topic and not feel exactly what you're feeling. There is just so much widespread death and devastation going on in this conflict in Gaza as a result of the October 7th attacks. And for me, I think my only contention with what you've laid out is there's sort of this competition for empathy. We only have so much to give. And so these two individuals are shot at the Israeli embassy here in Washington, D.C. just a couple of days ago. And the coverage has turned to that because it's odd. It's out of the usual. We haven't seen this kind of thing happen yet, this sort of political violence from the movement, the Palestinian movement here in the U.S., spill out into the streets in this kind of way. And we're covering it. And so there's not some sort of disproportionate coverage going on here of the plight of the Gazans or the Palestinians in Gaza versus Israelis and what they go through. There's just been a pivot. This is a new story. These are people on American soil shot dead. It's sad, and we're going to cover it, and the war is going to continue. It's gone on now for years. There's just so much to cover, and I don't think it's possible for people to actually hold in their hands every single casualty and every single person that dies in a foreign conflict.
Mm-hmm. I think that the way empathy works is complicated. And I think that obviously there's going to be a lot of coverage in a double murder that just happened in this city. Mm-hmm. Now, what I would say is that instances of violence, and I mentioned the young boy who was stabbed by his mother's landlord in Chicago, there was not, to my mind, the same level of soul-searching or outrage about that. There were 3 men of Palestinian heritage shot in Vermont, not fatally to be clear, but shot in Vermont. That story to me seemed to fade from the headlines rather quickly. Now, just briefly or tangentially on the point of accuracy, I am being told by our control room I said the couple were shot outside the Israeli embassy. If I did say that, that was a mistake on my part. They were shot at a reception. But the point is that I think that overall there is a propensity, and I'm not trying to, as I say, minimize anyone's grief, but there is a propensity to weigh those two griefs of the Israeli side on one hand and the Palestinian on the other.
I don't object to that at all. I think the thing that folks on my side of the aisle, I'm a conservative, have been looking at this and going, this is kind of what happens. You have a Chicago young man who's been involved in a lot of these protests, going to a lot of these demonstrations, shouting the slogans, globalize the Intifada. I think the most on-point analysis of this has been globalizing the Intifada requires this exact kind of thing. Rhetoric does have power. It is dangerous, and we need to be more vigilant of the way that we let people off the hook with these kind of slogans and say, oh, it's a metaphor. It's not a metaphor.
Sure.